The silverware trembled in my hand as my sister's words cut through the Christmas dinner conversation. "It is just so sad that some people never reach their potential," Brooke said, her eyes sliding toward me with practiced pity. "Jasmine, maybe you should ask Mr. Gary about openings in the mailroom. At least it is a real company." Mr. Gary, Brooke's boss, and our esteemed dinner guest, chuckled on cue, the expensive wine sloshing in his crystal glass. The sound of their shared laughter seemed to amplify as the blood rushed to my ears. I felt my chest constrict as I watched my parents exchange that look, the one that carried 20 years of disappointment. "The equipment shed is all ready for you, Jasmine," my mother, Angela, announced, breaking the tension only to sharpen it. "Since you did not contribute financially to the rental of this luxury cabin, we cannot have you taking up a guest room. It is only fair." She smiled, tight and cold. The table fell silent. This was their annual entertainment, watching me get put in my place. I need to know I am not the only one who has survived a dinner like this. Drop a yes in the comments if you have ever been made to feel small by the people who are supposed to build you up. Let us support each other. I did not say a word. I did not plead my case or point out the absurdity of the situation. I simply stood up, pushed my chair back, and walked out of the sliding glass doors into the biting aspen night. The wind hit me instantly, a sharp, physical reminder of exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. The equipment shed was about 50 yards from the main lodge. It was not designed for human habitation. It smelled of gasoline, old grease, and the sharp, metallic tang of cold steel. I found the cot my mother had mentioned, wedged between a snowblower and a stack of firewood. There was no insulation, just thin wooden slats separating me from the winter storm gathering outside. You might wonder why I did not flip the table, why I did not scream at my mother or throw my wine in Brooke's face. That is the most dangerous trap of long-term emotional abuse. It is the normalization of cruelty. When you are treated like furniture for 29 years, you do not build immunity, you build acceptance. You learn to make yourself smaller, quieter, and less visible, hoping that if you take up less space, the target on your back will shrink, too. It is a survival mechanism, a way to endure the unendurable, by convincing yourself that this is just how things are. I had been trained, like a dog, to accept the scraps and be grateful for them. But tonight, in the freezing dark, that training broke. I sat on the edge of the cot and opened my laptop. The screen came to life, casting a cool, blue glow against the rough timber walls. To my family, I was Jasmine the freelancer, the failure, the gig worker scraping by on copy jobs. They saw a woman with no direction. They did not realize that silence is where architects do their best work. I logged into the secure server. The logo of Helix Global appeared on the screen, rotating slowly. My company. The tech conglomerate I had founded 5 years ago in a garage, not unlike this shed. We specialized in AI-driven logistics and infrastructure, the invisible code that ran half the shipping lanes in the hemisphere. We were efficient, we were profitable, and most importantly, we were anonymous. I had built the entire structure through shell corporations and privacy trusts to keep my name out of the press. I navigated to the active acquisitions folder. There it was. The file for NovaCorp, Mr. Gary's company. The company where Brooke was the director of marketing. The company that my family worshipped as the pinnacle of success. They had no idea that NovaCorp was hemorrhaging money, that their legacy systems were obsolete, and that they were 2 weeks away from insolvency. They had no idea that Helix Global was the only bidder left at the table, the white knight coming to save them from bankruptcy. I looked at the status bar. Pending final executive signature. My signature. I sat there, shivering in my coat, listening to the muffled sound of laughter drifting from the warm, lit windows of the main lodge. They were in there, toasting to their own importance, drinking wine they could not afford, trying to impress a man whose career was currently resting in my frozen hands. I was not the exile in the shed, I was the judge in chambers, and court was about to be in session. While the wind howled against the thin metal walls of the shed, the main lodge was alive with warmth. Through the frost-glazed window, I could see them. My mother was pouring another round of champagne, her head thrown back in laughter. Brooke was holding court near the fireplace, gesturing wildly, likely recounting another tale of her corporate conquests at NovaCorp. They looked like a picture-perfect family enjoying a winter getaway. They had no idea that the ground beneath them was already dissolving. My laptop pinged. A single, sharp note that cut through the silence of my exile. A red banner flashed across the Helix Global dashboard. Critical alert. Due diligence failure. NovaCorp. I did not gasp. I did not panic. In my world, red flags are not emergencies, they are opportunities. I pulled my hands into my sleeves to keep them warm, and clicked on the notification. The acquisition algorithm had flagged a discrepancy in NovaCorp's fourth quarter financials. It was not a rounding error. It was a crater. I drilled down into the raw data, bypassing the glossy executive summaries Mr. Gary liked to present. The numbers do not lie, even when the people do. The discrepancy was in the marketing division. A massive overallocation of funds for a holiday campaign that had yielded zero return on investment, compounded by a series of vendor payments to shell companies that did not exist. I traced the authorization codes, they all led back to one user ID. B. Davis, Marketing Director. Brooke. My sister, the Director of Marketing, the golden child who claimed she was hustling while I was wasting my life, had torched $7.5 million of company capital in 3 months. And worse, she had tried to bury it in the end-of-year projections, hoping the acquisition would go through before anyone audited the books. She was not just incompetent, she was a liability, and Mr. Gary, the CEO who was currently drinking wine he could not afford in the other room, had signed off on these reports without checking them. I looked up at the window again. Brooke was clinking glasses with Mr. Gary. They were celebrating a merger that was supposed to make them both rich. They were celebrating my money. A wave of clarity washed over me, cold and refreshing as the mountain air. For years, they had told me I was not smart enough, driven enough, or real enough to sit at their table. They had mocked my freelance work, unaware that I was building the very infrastructure they relied on. Now, the fate of their careers, their reputations, and their financial futures sat on my screen, blinking in 12-point font. I did not feel vindictive. Vindictiveness is messy, it is emotional. This was business. I opened the executive command console. I had 2 options. I could let the deal proceed, absorb the loss, and fire them later. Or, I could pause the acquisition immediately, triggering an automatic fraud investigation that would freeze NovaCorp's assets by sunrise. I looked at the cot I was supposed to sleep on. I looked at the snow blowing in under the door. I moved my cursor to the Flag for Executive Review button. This would send an automated, high-priority alert to the seller's CEO, Mr. Gary, at 8 a.m. sharp, informing him that the deal was halted, pending an explanation for the $7 million hole in his books. I clicked. The status changed from pending to action required. I closed the laptop. The timer was set. They had 12 hours of ignorance left. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin, listening to the wind, and for the first time in a decade, I slept peacefully. The next evening, the banishment was temporarily lifted. My mother unlocked the sliding glass door and told me I could come inside for pre-dinner cocktails, provided I stayed in the background and did not embarrass anyone. I was not being invited to the party. I was being allowed to witness the performance. I stepped inside, the warmth of the lodge hitting my frozen skin like a physical blow. The room smelled of expensive cologne and desperation. Mr. Gary was holding court by the stone fireplace, swirling a glass of scotch that cost more than my first car. My father, Thomas, was nodding enthusiastically at everything he said, laughing a beat too late at jokes that were not funny. My mother was arranging hors d'oeuvres with the frantic energy of someone trying to curate a magazine spread in real time. And there was Brooke. She was wearing a shimmering, backless dress that looked stunning. It was also a lie. I knew for a fact, based on the financial audit I had run that morning, that she had maxed out 2 credit cards to buy it. She was vibrating with anxiety, checking her phone every 30 seconds, likely hoping for a distraction from the crushing debt she was trying to outrun. It was a masterclass in the illusion of power. There is a specific frequency that radiates from people who are pretending to be rich. It is loud, it is frantic, it screams for attention, because silence allows the truth to creep in. They mistake assets for liabilities. They think a leased Range Rover parked in the driveway is a symbol of success, rather than a monthly drain on liquidity. They think a designer logo is a status symbol, rather than a marketing tax on the insecure. I stood in the corner, sipping tap water, and dissected them. Mr. Gary was talking about his portfolio. He mentioned his vacation home in Cabo, and his new boat. But I had seen the Helix Global Diligence report. The boat was leveraged against the house, and the house was leveraged against the company's stock that was currently worthless because he had not updated his infrastructure since 2015. He did not own his life. He was renting it from the bank at a variable interest rate. You should really look into leasing a new car, Jasmine, my father said, turning to me, trying to bring me into the fold only to lecture me. That old truck of yours is an eyesore, next to Mr. Gary's SUV. Perception is reality, you know. I own my truck, Dad, I said quietly. It gets me from point A to point B without interest payments. Brooke snorted. That is a scarcity mindset, Jasmine. You have to spend money to make money. Look at us. We are projecting success. And that attracts success. I looked at her. I looked at the dark circles under her eyes that the expensive concealer could not quite hide. She was not projecting success. She was projecting panic. There is a difference, I said, my voice level, between net worth and self-worth. And there is a difference between having money and owing money. Mr. Gary chuckled, condescending and bloated with unearned confidence. Cute philosophy. But in the big leagues, kid, leverage is king. You use other people's money to build your castle. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp thing. That works, Mr. Gary. Until the people whose money you are using decide to call in the loan. He did not understand. He thought I was talking about banks. He did not realize I was talking about me. I was not just the girl in the corner. I was the bank, and I was about to foreclose on his reality. The notification hit Mr. Gary's phone at exactly 8 p.m. It was not a standard text chime. It was the shrill, persistent alarm he had set for level 1 corporate emergencies. The room froze. He pulled the phone from his pocket, his face flushed from the scotch in the fireplace. He swiped the screen, squinting at the alert. I watched the blood drain from his face in real time, leaving his skin a sickly, mottled gray. What is it? Brooke asked, her voice tight. Is it the wire transfer? The deal is paused, Mr. Gary whispered. Then he roared. The deal is paused. Who flagged the audit? He started pacing the expensive rug, mashing buttons on his phone, screaming at his chief financial officer on the other end of the line. What do you mean internal negligence? I signed those reports myself. Fix it. I do not care what time it is. Wake the auditors up. I sat perfectly still in the corner, my hands folded in my lap. I was not drinking wine. I was not eating cheese. I was watching a demolition. Mr. Gary hung up, his chest heaving. He turned to my father. They are saying there is a discrepancy in the marketing budget. A massive one. If this sticks, the acquisition price drops to zero. I am ruined. Call the CEO, my father suggested, desperate to be helpful. You said you had a line to the top at Helix Global. Call them. Smooth it over. You can charm anyone, Gary. Mr. Gary straightened his tie. He took a deep breath, summoning the ghost of his arrogance. You are right. I will call the owner directly. We have never met, but they know my reputation. I will get this sorted. He pulled up the contact info from the emergency disclosure documents. He looked around the room, needing an audience for his salvation. He tapped the screen and hit the speakerphone button. Quiet, everyone, he commanded. Let me handle this. The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the rhythmic, hollow ringing echoing from his phone. And then, a half-second later, my phone began to ring. It was loud. A standard, default ringtone that cut through the tension like a knife. Brooke glared at me. Jasmine, turn that off. Are you serious? Answer it, Jasmine. My mother hissed. He is on an important call. Mr. Gary looked annoyed, distracted by the noise. The ringing continued, ringing from his hand, ringing from my pocket. I did not decline the call. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I looked Mr. Gary dead in the eyes. And I swiped green. Hello, Mr. Gary. My voice did not come from across the room, it came from the speakerphone in his hand. The feedback loop shrieked for a microsecond before he lowered the volume, his eyes bulging. He looked at his phone screen. Then he looked at me. He looked back at the phone. The cognitive dissonance was hitting him so hard, I thought he might stroke out right there on the rug. I am looking at the fourth quarter reports, I said into my phone, my voice calm, professional, and terrifyingly familiar. We need to talk about the $7.5 million loss in the marketing department, and the fact that you signed off on it. There is a specific psychological event known as a narcissistic injury. It is not just embarrassment. It is the total, violent collapse of the false self. A narcissist builds their entire reality around a hierarchy where they are God and you are an insect. When that hierarchy is inverted, when the insect stands up and speaks with the voice of God, the narcissist does not just feel fear, they feel a fragmentation of their soul. It is a moment of absolute, blinding ego death. I watched it happen to him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The phone slipped from his sweaty grip and landed with a thud on the carpet. You, he wheezed. You are Helix? I founded Helix Global 5 years ago, I said, ending the call and slipping my phone back into my pocket. While you were leasing boats and lecturing me about leverage, I was buying the infrastructure of your industry. I stood up. The silence in the room was heavier than the snow outside. Brooke was trembling, her hand covering her mouth. My parents looked like they were hallucinating. The deal is dead, Gary, I said. And tomorrow morning the forensic accountants arrive. I suggest you start looking for a lawyer. Jasmine, please, my mother stammered, her voice shaking as she stepped toward me. The wine glass she was holding trembled in her grip. We did not know. If we had known you were successful, we would have treated you differently. I know, I said. That is exactly the problem. We are family, she pleaded, tears welling up in her eyes. The practiced, weaponized tears she used whenever she lost control of a situation. Families make mistakes. Families forgive. You cannot destroy your sister's career over a misunderstanding. Think about the baby. Think about us. I looked at them. Really looked at them. My father, who had lectured me on optics while drowning in debt. My sister, who had built a career on smoke and mirrors. My mother, who valued pregnancy over personhood. They were not asking for forgiveness because they were sorry. They were asking for amnesty because they were terrified. I am thinking about us, I said. And I am thinking about the equipment shed. We can fix that, my father interjected eagerly. You can have the master suite. We will move our things out right now. Just call off the auditors, Jasmine, please. I shook my head slowly. It is too late for that, but there is one more thing we need to discuss. The cabin. I gestured to the high timber beams, the roaring fireplace, the panoramic windows overlooking the slopes. Beautiful place. Vanguard stays, right? Yes, my father said, confused by the pivot. We rented it through the Vanguard app, top tier. I know, I said. Helix Global acquired Vanguard stays 3 months ago as part of our hospitality vertical. I did not just buy your company, Dad. I bought the platform you rented this house from. I pulled my phone back out and opened the admin app. I tapped the screen, projecting a digital document onto the massive smart TV mounted above the fireplace. It was a rental agreement. Clause 14, Section B. I read aloud. Strict adherence to occupancy safety standards. Use of non-habitable structures for guest accommodation is a violation of liability codes and grounds for immediate termination of the rental agreement. Brooke gasped. You cannot be serious. You forced a registered guest me to sleep in an uninsulated shed with flammable fuels in sub-zero temperatures, I said. That is a massive liability for my company, and as the owner, I have a duty to mitigate risk. I tapped the screen one final time. A notification pinged on my father's phone. Rental agreement terminated. Vacate immediately. You are evicting us? My mother shrieked. In the middle of the night? In a blizzard? I am not evicting you, I said, my voice ice cold. I am enforcing the contract you signed. You have 30 minutes to vacate the premises before the smart locks engage and the security system alerts the local authorities for trespassing. Where are we supposed to go? Brooke cried. All the hotels are booked for the holidays. I do not know, I said, walking toward the master bedroom to retrieve my bag. But I hear the equipment shed is available. There is a heater in the corner. I am sure it is better than what most people have. 2 black SUVs with the Vanguard Stays logo rolled up the snowy driveway precisely 12 minutes later. They were not the police. They were private security, the kind that cost a fortune and did not ask questions. 2 men in dark coats stepped out, professional and imposing against the swirling white of the blizzard. "Miss Jasmine," the lead officer said, stepping into the foyer and ignoring my weeping mother. "We received the termination order. Are these the unauthorized occupants?" "They are," I said. "Please escort them off the property. Ensure the main lodge is secured." My father tried one last time, his voice cracking. "Jasmine, be reasonable. You cannot throw your parents out into a storm. It is Christmas." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had watched me walk out into that same storm 24 hours ago and had not even paused his toast. "I am not unreasonable, Dad," I said. "I am a realist. The roads are closed and the hotels are full. So, I am authorizing a temporary stay in the auxiliary structure." I pointed through the glass doors to the dark, metal shed shivering in the wind. "The heater works if you kick it," I said, repeating the exact advice my mother had given me the night before. "There is a cot and some blankets next to the snowblower. I am sure you will be comfortable enough until the roads clear." Brooke made a sound like a wounded animal. "You cannot expect us to sleep in there." "I do not expect anything from you anymore, Brooke," I replied. "That is the beauty of it." I turned my back on them and walked up the floating staircase to the master suite. I did not watch security escort them out. I did not watch them drag their designer luggage through the snowdrifts. I did not need to see it. The silence that followed the slamming of the front door was the only confirmation I needed. I walked into the master bathroom, a space of marble and glass that I technically owned, but had never used. I turned on the steam shower. I poured the rest of Mr. Gary's expensive scotch down the sink and filled a glass with tap water. I stood by the window, looking down at the small, dark shed in the distance. A faint light flickered on inside. They were safe. They were cold, they were cramped, and they were furious, but they were safe. That was more mercy than they had shown me. I realized then that I did not feel guilty. I did not feel sad. I felt light. For years, I had been carrying the weight of their expectations, their judgments, and their debts. I had let them define my worth by the label on my clothes and the title on my business card. I had hidden my empire because I was afraid of outshining them, afraid that my success would only deepen the divide. But the divide was already there. I had just stopped building the bridge from my side. 6 months later, the acquisition of NovaCorp was finalized. We restructured the entire leadership team. Brooke was let go for gross negligence and financial misconduct. She is currently trying to launch a lifestyle blog about overcoming adversity. Mr. Gary was kept on as a figurehead consultant with no signing power, a golden handcuffs arrangement that forces him to report to me every quarter. He hates it. He needs the money. I am writing this from my winter estate in Tahoe. It is 20,000 square feet of glass and steel, nestled in the pines. It is quiet here. My phone does not ring with emergency demands for money. My dinner table does not have a seat for anyone who makes me feel small. I learned that you cannot buy respect from people who profit from your insecurity. You cannot teach empathy to those who view relationships as transactions. And sometimes, the only way to win the game is to buy the board, evict the players, and start over on your own terms. Success is quiet. It does not need to shout to be heard. It just needs to sign the check. If you have ever had to cut off the people you love to save the person you are becoming, share your story in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe for more stories from the silence.